So a question came in, and I thought it was a valuable question and worth talking about in general. It says, I'm wondering how, in practice, how is Sati-Sampajañña different from just sati? Reading, it looks like it is sati plus sense restraint and observation of the three characteristics, wondering how we actually practice this. And so I thought it would be valuable to talk a little bit about this and some of the different ways in which this is viewed. And Sampajañña is often translated as wisdom. It can also mean attention, consideration, discrimination, comprehension. Sometimes it's translated as situational awareness. I think that's what Bhante Sujato's been using, or clear comprehension. So basically, sati in itself is mindfulness, or of course, that's usually the translation that's used. And it's being present, it's being aware. And then the Sampajañña part is adding wisdom, or more of an awareness of the context and clarity about what it is that we're observing or investigating. And in the commentary, we see a definition that includes 4 parts, like knowing what the purpose is of what you're observing. So maybe the sati, maybe you're aware, that and they give all these examples for monastics in the commentary. And we have to remember that the commentary was about 1,500 years ago and about 1,000 years after the Buddha. So it's serious practitioners with a lot of practice under their belt, and yet they're trying to give guidance and elaboration and evaluation of the Buddhist teachings in a way that's going to help, particularly probably monastics. And so what they do is they're adding some material on to the definition or the specific word. And so they talk about purpose, suitability, domain, and non-delusion. That these are things to pay attention to when you're considering practicing with Sampajañña. The purpose, like knowing why you're doing what you're doing and whether or not it's actually a suitable time to do it, or it's a suitable way of doing it. And then the domain is actually the Pali word. It means field. So you're within your own, you're in the proper kind of area, you might say. And not, really seeing the true nature of things. And that's where the idea of looking at the 3 characteristics is whatever we're engaged in or whatever we're working with. Is it impermanent or permanent, dukkha or not? And what is it, self or not? And so those are valuable things to consider, but it can also get kind of heady. And so it's useful to maybe take notice of that. In the commentary, the examples are somewhat, interesting, certainly appropriate to the time and the audience. Like the one for suitability it's like, this novice monk is traveling with a bhikkhu, with a fully ordained monk, and they're walking. And the novice goes ahead and is ahead, and he notices a dead body at the side of the road. And he stops and he starts to meditate on this body, which I don't know, probably wouldn't be the first thing I would think of doing. I don't know if you would or not, but he's meditating on this dead body, and he actually, in the story, he realizes stream entry, and then once returning and then non-returning, and he's almost right at the edge of arahantship, and he hears the bhikkhu calling his name. And he thinks to himself, well, I've never let a monk call me twice, so I have to stop now and go. And then again, I'm not sure that's where I would go with that. But anyway, he goes back to the monk, and then they walk there together, and then the monk also meditates on the body and also goes through the same stages. And anyway, the point being, that's their example for a suitable time to be focused on that meditation object. So as you can tell, it's not always necessarily the most helpful for us coming from the commentary, but it can be very useful. It depends. I think for me, thinking about Sati and Sampajañña, first of all, the Buddha paired those so often that it really doesn't, I want to say, I think really most of the time in practice, the wisdom is already there. I imagine that when you're practicing, you're already, quite aware of these various things about it. Like one of the common things that teachers say is, you can rob a bank mindfully, but there's not much wisdom there. So it's like we really do want to have that wisdom faculty present. And then it's interesting to me that the way that various teachers that I've had have talked about this. So I pulled out a few quotes. When I was visiting Luangpur Panyawato years ago, one of the things he said was that there really are these two things that one should work for and develop, and they are mindfulness and wisdom. So he says the Buddha called it Sati-Sampajañña. And he said the mindfulness keeps one in check. It prevents one from straying, and the wisdom shows the truth and clears out all the rubbish. And Ajahn Sumedho has been talking about, he also, in a talk I listened to recently, the title of this one is Not Getting What One Wants is Suffering. And I highly recommend it for everyone on YouTube. And as he's talking about awareness, which he uses the word mindfulness, he uses the word awareness, pure awareness. And he says it's really the escape hatch into ultimate reality is through awareness, through investigation, Sati-Sampajañña, to really investigate. So it's like, we're operating within this world of impermanent material, and it's not even just the physical things, it's everything, our thoughts and feelings, our perceptions, all the conditioning, like someone earlier was mentioning the deep social conditioning that we have, the way that we think about how things should work and what we put our attention on, it's all conditioned. And all of that is is not what ultimate reality is about. And how do we move from or realize that ultimate reality? And it really is this escape hatch of mindfulness or awareness. And it seems like getting to the place where we can completely let go of everything is far away, or it has to be some nearly impossible thing. It can feel like that. But if we really let ourselves settle in to awareness itself, and we start to, and that sampajañña, that wisdom, also needs to be there to actually provide the understanding, the deep understanding, to have right view, to have right practice. But that's if we listen to Longpa Sumedho and Longpa Ganha, that's really all it is. It's like, that's it. That's what brings us to the point of being free from all dukkha. Doesn't mean we don't have dukkha arising. It's just that we don't take it personally anymore. We don't buy into it anymore. We're not caught up in it anymore. So, this is powerful. He says that this Sati-Sampajañña this is what conscious awareness is about. It's apparent here and now, timeless. Ayya Santussikā, he said, wake up and see for yourself. Go inwards. Don't seek nibbana as some external ideal place. It's apparent here and now. Ehi pasiko opanayako pachatang we titabo vinyuhi, to be realized individually. And that's the definition we chant every day about Dhamma. So he's using these words as synonyms: sati and sampajañña, awareness, Dhamma, nibbana. So the importance of this question, really can carry us to how do we position ourselves or put in the causes and conditions that that's actually what I'm doing with my practice. Instead of thinking about it as some kind of special technique or approach, it's really settling into what's at the root, most natural to us. And Longpa Ganha has been saying, said to us, come back to Sampajañña, which is the Dhamma without the sense of self. So when we're aware in this way, and I was going to say applying wisdom, but it makes it sound like something we're doing. But the wisdom is there to inform us of the way things actually are. The sense of self is gone. So, our engagement in the world is constantly coming through the sense of self. That's how we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, think, everything that's coming in, we're conditioned to observe it and evaluate it, like, how does it affect me? What do I want? What do I want to get rid of? That's our that's our conditioned stance. But when we realize the true nature of all of those things, that they're unreliable, our attachment to them is the cause of dukkha. When we recognize that, then whatever we perceive comes through it in a different way, and we're evaluating it in a different way, without the sense of self, without any fear of anything, without any fear of losing anything, without any regrets over the past, without any fears about the future. And just to even kind of recognize that this is possible is valuable. So I want to also share with you a summary that was written by Samaneri Viveka, who had lived at Ajahn Ganha's monastery for 7 years, and she was making an effort to summarize some of Lungpa Ganha's teachings. And she wrote that practicing should be a continuous effort every day from waking up until going to bed. And this is what Ajahn Ganha says. Try to maintain sati, being aware of what you're thinking, saying, and doing, and sampajañña, knowing what is the wise way of thinking, speaking, and acting, as best you can throughout the day. Investigate the state you become aware of, that's Dhamma vichaya, investigation, and arouse energy to change it if necessary, that's the energy or virya. This improvement gives you a boost of happiness, piti, sometimes called rapture or joy, and you can carry on feeling satisfied or tranquil, and that's passaddhi. Satisfied that you're on the right track and your heart becomes peaceful or still, samadhi, and more equanimous, upekkha, towards what's going on. So you might recognize these as the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then she went on, this way of practicing and making progress works both in the present moment and in the long run. If you investigate like this a lot, your whole life will naturally become wiser, happier, and more peaceful. This is called the development of the 5 indriya. So this is all summarizing Ajahn Ganha, and he talks about this in this way too. These 5 indriya are 5 faculties or 5 powers, which are saddha, faith, trust in the Dhamma, virya, effort and energy, sati, awareness, presence of mind, and samadhi, stillness, peace, being unified, and pañña, wisdom. So here the wisdom is pañña, which is a little bit different from sampajañña, but very closely related. And it's interesting to consider how to use those 7 factors of awakening in that way, just maybe in a single meditation session. And I really want to encourage, when you meditate or when you're just moving through your day, you can, as Ajahn Ganha said, we can do this from the time we wake up till the time we go to sleep. It's really being aware, present, and being aware of what we're doing and what it's for, what it means. Whether or not what we're experiencing is, where our attachments are and how we can let go. And in that awareness, of course, we're just stepping back, from it and seeing it as it is. As this is really the function of mindfulness and wisdom together, being able to really investigate and observe, to understand that, our ideas about who we are conditioned into us from the time we're born, and some of it certainly carried from previous lifetimes. And also that all of the social and cultural conditioning we experience, it's just conditioning, just ideas. It doesn't make it, it's not absolute. It's not the absolute truth. And it changes, all of it. And we can change our habits and our views and opinions to align with the deep truth of the way things are, the Dhamma. So that's the reflection on Sati-Sampajañña, and the encouragement and recognizing that this too is another way of identifying with, in its kind of like like any kind of words we put to it or identification of what it means to, realize the true nature of things is inadequate, because that experience covers it and we can't possibly really describe that in total. But this certainly points to it in a way that gives us enough to go on, to be able to practice. And so it's moment by moment. And then insight arises and into the nature of reality. And our life becomes happier, like in that sequence. More joy, more peace, more calm, more shifting away from the time-bound, stress-bound nature of samsara. So I think I'll leave it at that and invite any comments or questions, further thoughts. Yes, Ling.
Yeah, I sort of was really making great sense for me with this summary just mentioned. Ajahn Gahan talked about how to develop mindfulness continuously in daily life. I have a little bit unclear how Sampajañña kind of come into the daily life. Just listen to what you read. I can imagine, okay, mindfulness from the moment I wake up, I can imagine, making continuous efforts, getting up, mindful how I put my feet down, walk each step, be aware how do I, open the toilet door, etc. I can remind myself for this kind of being aware of my movement, my body. I was wondering, how does Sampajañña look like in the continuous efforts practice in a daily life? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ling. So there are so many layers to this idea of being mindful. What you're describing as being mindful of our motion and the things we're actually doing, that's one level, I would say, or at least this is the way I'm thinking of it. It's kind of like layers. That's one layer. But we also want to be aware of the feelings that are arising in us. For example, when we wake up in the morning, what's our state of mind? And of course, we see this all laid out in the Satipatthana Sutta. We're aware of the body, how the body's feeling. It's not just, what happens as our feet touch the floor or, opening the door. That keeps us focused and our mind's not running off to think about all kinds of other things. There's value in that. But it's also important to know what's the feeling, you know? Am I cultivating kindness and warmth? When I wake up in the morning, I don't have, some days you wake up, in kind of a funky mood, or some days you wake up just like happy, and it's, who knows what the causes and conditions are for it. Feeling changes. But the mindfulness is like to be aware of that. And then the wisdom is to know that we don't have to identify with it. Feeling's just a feeling. And it's going to change. So the wisdom part, the Sampajañña is, I know that this feeling is going to change. Or we're going to put our feet on the floor. We know it's going to be cold and we're not going to like it. And we know we don't like it. But we know that's okay. It's not going to be too bad. It's going to change. My feet will get used to it, or whatever it is. Put the socks on. It's like, but the point is being aware that all of this stimulation coming through our senses is the way we perceive the world and know how to respond, but that it's not me. It's not a self. And at some level, it's not so important. Not as important as recognizing that the awareness itself is the escape hatch from dukkha. And that awareness and bringing kindness along with it makes our heart, uplifts our heart, having, bringing in the images or the ideas, the concepts, the chanting, whatever it is that lifts us up. And really observing the whole thing from a very neutral perspective. Not so much from what's right and wrong and best or worst or whatever it is. Not so much from, like, oh, I wasn't aware when I put my feet on the floor. So what? It's like all of those evaluations, that's also part of samsara. That's part of this world that has, all of this stress in it. So to see if we can just come back to that awareness and wisdom without the sense of self, like Ajahn Ganha said. And so, it's not like we keep a scorecard about every minute of the day. That's again the self imposing its, requirements and the critic of the mind. That's not what we want to be doing. What we want to be doing is just gently, kindly bringing our attention to whatever it is that we're experiencing and experience it directly. And seeing its true nature and asking ourselves questions about it. And when we find ourselves suffering, when we find ourselves stressed, to really investigate, why? Why am I clinging to this? Or why is this a thing? And it doesn't mean that there isn't anything important in the world. It doesn't mean we reject the world or we don't do things. Like I said, watching a movie with my mother was a really good thing to do. It's good to be present and kind and supportive of people in our life, and stand up for what's good and protect the vulnerable. And there are so many things that are really worthy of our attention and our support in this world. But as we do it, can we do it without the sense of self? Can we do it from a place of awareness and that wisdom quality? someone told me once they were coming to a teaching I was giving, and they said they made up their mind and they were going to really be mindful. And then they were driving and they went right through a red light. And, it's kind of like, what are we mindful of? If you're mindful of your hands on the steering wheel, maybe you're going to miss something, you know? And so it's not just bearing down and being focused and, like aware of every detail. We have to be a mindful of something, but what's the important thing to be aware of right now? And how to be aware of the whole situation, maybe, and what is it that's meaningful in this moment. Yes, Linda.
A question came up when you were answering Ling, and when you mentioned about moving to investigate once you are aware and you notice, and in day-to-day life, that's often a challenge, because if you're in a dynamic, if you're not alone, I find it hard to investigate. And so what happens is, in a dynamic situation, and the next thing happens, and the next thing happens, and I don't investigate. And then I notice later in the day, when I'm quiet, then all that stuff comes back up, because it didn't get resolved, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we work with that in the context of continuous awareness?
Well, there is some development in it as we practice with the intention to be present, but it's also true that there may need to be time later to really unpack things, other aspects of what was happening in the moment that we weren't able to really reflect on at the time. That's perfectly natural, I think. There is something, though, to sort of training ourselves to be aware of what the other person is saying and where they're coming from, and also what's arising in ourselves. So it is something we can develop, and in developing it, we can become more clear and more aware of our own conditioning around how we hear things and respond. So I guess my answer is twofold. It's both of the things you talked about. I think we continue to need to, or it can find it valuable, let's put it that way. I think we can continue to find it valuable to reflect upon something that happened, and then that's what your present moment is. You're remembering the situation and working through it, or being present with the feelings that arise in the body and so on from that previous situation. That's a really valuable way of using mindfulness and clear comprehension. And at the same time, we also can develop more sort of inner stability. A lot of times, I think when we don't, when we maybe miss things, or maybe it's not missing things, but we can't process it all. Some of that is because there's maybe a lot of anxiety inside around what's happening. And it's not to feel like there's any blame for that or anything wrong with it. It's just that the more we become detached in an appropriate, wholesome way, the more bandwidth we have to be able to be, with that ongoing dynamic situation that we're experiencing.
Okay.
Paula.
Would you clarify awareness? I somehow have a block in understanding and like differentiating it from mindfulness and sampajañña.
I don't think you can differentiate it from mindfulness. I mean, awareness is the word that Longpa Meadows uses a lot of the time, but he'll also interchange it with these other words. So mindfulness, when he says mindfulness is the escape hatch. Also, this morning I mentioned to Linda this quote of Ajahn Sumedho that's in another talk that he gave that I listened to recently called not getting what we want is suffering, something like that. And he was saying that taking refuge in the Buddha it's actually mindfulness is taking refuge in the Buddha. And I think I said awareness at the time, and he uses these words interchangeably. So what does it feel like when we're aware, when we're mindful, when we're present? When we're seeing something like our anger or our resentment or our fear as something external to us, not something we're awash in, not something we're caught up in, but observing it. It's like, oh, look at that. Sometimes a flash of a feeling can come through the whole system and you go, wow, look at that. and it's like the look at that, to be aware of it. And then the wisdom, the Sampajañña, to be aware of what that is and what it means or where it's from, or just in seeing it for what it is. So that mention in the commentary about the three characteristics, that's a beautiful way to practice, powerful way to practice. And that investigation is, is this permanent? Is this dukkha? Is this not? Is this self? And it's of course it's coming right out of the suttas, the early sermons the Buddha gave. It's this is how we start to see through the illusion of this world as real. So you can just notice whether or not you're aware of what's happening. That's mindfulness. And then are you seeing this the way it actually is? And I think the experience right now, something coming up in our mind about the news, and it's maybe scary, maybe confusing, maybe anger invoking or whatever. And then with the awareness that that's happening in us, we can be mindful of what's really happening here. Yes, there might be something valuable we can do, but if we're coming to it from a place of seeing it as the kinds of things that happen in this world, the kinds of things that have happened throughout human history, the kinds of things that come from greed, hatred, and delusion and cause so much trouble for so many people. We can recognize the true nature of these things, and we can still spontaneously take action without being caught up in it all. Yes, Steve?
Well, one one little practice I've been doing to kind of for mindfulness is to kind of go through the aggregates in terms of looking at what's happening right now. What's in the body, how does it feel, and then what perceptions are coloring things, and what I'm thinking about those perceptions, and then what it's like. And it's a little bit artificial. I mean, I like what you've been saying, that it's breaking it up into steps like that, but it kind of helps me bring things back to looking at the different aspects of what's happening right now. And I don't know if that's
Yeah, I think that's very valuable. And it really speaks to the question of how do we practice with it. And it's like the specific practices that we use. You might use something for a while, and then when it kind of loses its appeal, try it another way. And there are these, the Buddha gave us so many different approaches.
Yeah. There's a lot of these lists can be used that way, I think. That's
and what's interesting about the Dhamma is that you pick up one of those things, and then it just kind of pulls everything else with it. You can look at it from this, with this through this list. And then, if you want to, like set that aside, you can, see the same thing coming from another list, and you can just, work with it that way. And the main thing is that we become more happy and free, through these efforts, and relaxed, and like, yes, our confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha increase, and our sila, our moral virtue improves, and our kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity increase, and all of these things, we can take notice of the progress that occurs as we develop on the path. And sometimes insight arises that really shows us that this thing that I've been holding as so important really isn't what it looks like. That what I think I am, who I think I am, isn't really who I am. And those insights really change us, and bring more joy and happiness, and less fear and anxiety. Yes, Paula?
You mentioned working with some of this in meditation, and my question is, having just done a course on Anapanasati, and knowing that you go to impermanence, dispassion, cessation, letting go, but I'm is there another way, after you've kind of had a sort of a feeling that you've had a little bit of stability, stillness, to investigate? Is that what you're talking about? And can you speak a little bit more about how to do that?
So your course on was it Anapanasati or Satipatthana? Was Anapanasati?
Most recent was Anapanasati.
Which of course is a kind of representation of Satipatthana, because the body, feeling, mind, and Dhamma are all in there. As I said, there's there are so many different approaches. Like when you look at the Satipatthana Sutta, the foundations of mindfulness, there are these many different objects of meditation and reflection that are there. And it is helpful to support the mind or allow the mind to become still. And, through being aware and present, through being mindful, the mind kind of shifts away from its ordinary rational thinking processes into, you might think of it as an altered state of consciousness, or maybe a deeply relaxed, open mind, things like that. And within that space, have questions arise or hold a question that you want to investigate. And it's more about contemplation than it is about trying to figure something out. So the temptation of our, depending on our conditioning, the temptation can be that we want to figure it out. And it isn't really how we come up with new information or new insight, is better to say it that way. So to open up to what we have not seen before, and this is what the Buddha talks about, going where we haven't gone before, seeing what we haven't seen before. That requires having the mind calm down, the thinking rational aspect of the mind to become still, and let the more intuitive, contemplative part of the mind engage. And so that's why it's about letting go and relaxing rather than bearing down and concentrating. And when we do that, it can feel out of control, because it is out of control. But if we really look at things with wisdom, with Sampajañña or Panya, then we know that the whole thing's out of control anyway. The whole world. And that's okay. And then, when we let go of trying to control things, then things can come up that we haven't had contact with or understanding of before. And that's a kind of it's a valuable way of investigating. So investigating isn't like I'm going to figure it out. It's more about, here's my question. Let's see what comes up.
You sometimes set that as an intention. Like lately, last couple times, I just set an intention to just relax, and I was really surprised how well that worked. I did it sort of out of desperation, but would you also maybe, like if something has been coming up that you want to, I don't know, if investigate isn't quite the right word, but let come to
something you want to understand.
Would you possibly set that as an intention and then just drop it until you had that stillness and just try to relax more again?
Yeah, sometimes the way I think of it is you having a question in the back of your mind. Like you have this question. You don't even have to really, like if it's like, here's my question, and I want an answer, that doesn't work. It's more like, there's this kind of interest or curiosity that we have, and you know, coming to it in a way that's relaxed and open, but not, you know, you know, we can form the question in our mind and then just let it go and let it be. And yes, the intention really makes a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions about this?
This is a very beautiful talk. Thanks, Ayya. I think it's very useful. Even I will like all the questions that people have asked.
Yeah.
They're very useful. So one thing is, I like Ajahn Ganha's explanation about Sati-Sampajañña, like to not only be mindful, but whatever is arising, see what is the ideal state and how it is arising for us, how our self is coming in there, and then try to incline towards the ideal state if we can. Otherwise, just do our best effort in there. So there is these three characteristics, right? Like impermanence, no self, and then no suffering. In Ajahn Gandha and Ajahn Sumedho, both of them, and also I've seen this in the past in the Zen practice that I've done. Like primarily, a lot of emphasis is given to watching the self or no self aspect of that. How everything revolves around the self and how we want to watch and then move away from that self-centeredness. Why is that the most important of these three characteristics?
It's not.
Okay.
I would say there is this idea that any one of us might resonate more with one of those characteristics, like might really be focused on impermanence, for example. I had that for quite a while, where it's just like you're just noticing the impermanence of everything. It just starts to sink in that, you know, I'm attached to these things that are falling apart, you know, that kind of thing. Or somebody might really be focused more on the dukkha. So I think, you know, it may seem like it's mostly focusing on not self. I think maybe that's because the idea, like Ajahn Gana says, you know, we come to everything from the sense of self. That's our basis as we're, you know, get born, and then the conditioning of like how we learn about who we are or supposed to be or whatever. You know, it's like that's how we're seeing the world when we don't have any broader understanding of reality. So it's not as if that's when you talk about the three characteristics, it's not as if not self is the most important. I think it's just used in a little bit different way. Like when we see that, when in the three characteristics, it's like, you know, if there's something that I really think is precious, whether it's, you know, some object, something that I have, or maybe it's, you know, my time with my daughter, or whatever, you know, and whatever I think is really precious and that I'm afraid of losing, that I can observe that and then see that, you know, what's really behind that clinging, and how, you know, like the reality is sometimes, someday, somehow, my daughter and I will be separated. There's no way that cannot happen. And to also reflect as a parent, you know, you have so much invested in these children, you know, so much of our time and our energy and our care, and then they have to grow up and go on their own. And I remember, I might have mentioned this to people before, I remember my daughter saying when my granddaughter was like 2 years old, she said, it's like my heart is out there running around. You know, it's like you just, you know, you're trying so hard to keep them safe, and then they go out and be their own person in the world. And, you know, the reflection of, you know, like, you know, well, what's really the reality, you know? And so when we come to parenting, let's say from the sense of self in a really strong way, we've got a plan for what their life should be, and we want them to follow it. I can't tell you how many people have told me that their parents really wanted them to be a doctor, and they're disappointed because they weren't, you know. But you know, as a parent, then we can use, as a practitioner, we can use this as an opportunity to look at, well, what I should be, well, maybe not. We can look at this as an opportunity to really look at, well, what's the truth? The truth is, I'm not, and the fundamental, most real level, ultimate reality, I'm not this body. I'm not these feelings and thoughts and perceptions and habits and views and opinions, and none of that. It's all conditioning. And my daughter isn't the image that I have in my mind of her and how she looks and how she acts and how she smiles and her humor and all of that. It's all conditioned, impermanent, falling apart. Doesn't mean that I still value and love her, but that's at a different level. It's like to really love her is without any conditions attached to it at all. So I think what I'm trying to get at is when we think about the three characteristics, they are all of, I would say, equal value. They're all important in terms of helping our mind come to the truth and then let go of our attachments. But when we talk about taking the sense of self as our basis for life, as opposed to taking the Dhamma as our basis for life, it's like talking about self as at a different level. That's what I think. Any last questions or comments? Really appreciate everyone's practice, and the word in my mind is diligence, and I mean that in the best of ways. Not like some kind of strict bearing down, although strictness has its place. But you know, something that's really informed by wisdom and kindness.